Greetings, everyone. This is Sal Munoz with All Chicago. I'm the System Implementation Manager, and I'm going to be talking to you about the DFSS quarterly reporting. So, what we are going to be doing is a quick review. In this short video, we'll be showing you how to download the reports, preparing the DFSS quarterly report for submission. We'll be touching on a bit of carryover reporting as well, and how to submit the report itself. So let's go get into the review. As you all know, starting this year, DFSS quarterly report will begin to source data from HMIS. So that means that in years past, the DFSS quarterly report was generally created using any data that you had on hand, whether it be Excel or in your own internal database. But this year, what we're trying to do is move in a direction where all data entry is feeding into the quarterly report and pulling from HMIS. However, there are a few exceptions to this rule. So we have domestic violence providers who do not use HMIS, and at this point, they would have received a template. So if you're a domestic violence provider, domestic violence shelter, you do not need to necessarily worry about this workflow because you're not even using HMIS. And then we have a couple of projects that don't use HMIS. If you do not use HMIS, at this point, you should have sent an email to hmis@allchicago and requested a blank template so that we can help you get submitted for this quarter. Now let's talk a little bit about the first quarter report. So the inaugural report really allows a lot of flexibility in where you pull data from. So every single report will be structured as such. So if you look on the right hand side, we have section 2. And section 2 has a orange section and a corresponding green section. Now, the green section, the green tables, those are going to be those are going to be tables that have information sourced from HMIS. So these tables are all pulling from your entry assessments that you create for every single client. Now, you're not going to be submitting these green tables. What you're actually going to be doing is going through the report in Excel and filling out every single orange and pink cell that there is. And the reason we're doing this is because we know there are going to be a couple of kinks in how your data is being set. So we didn't want to automatically assume that every single piece of data in HMIS should be reflected and reported to DFSS. We wanted to give agencies a chance to sort of catch up and do their own internal data quality so that they can ensure that they're submitting the right things to DFSS. Now, again, what you're going to be on the lookout for are any orange and pink cells. Now, the difference here is that the orange cell has a corresponding reference cell. That reference cell can be used to then influence how you are inputting information in the orange cells. But the difference with the pink cells is that the pink cells do not have a corresponding reference table. The pink cells must be sourced elsewhere. One good example, and we'll get to a good example of that later on down the line. Now let's talk a little bit about color coding before we open up one of the reports. So again, green indicates that the table has information that's sourced from HMIS. Orange indicates that the table requires manual data entry, but you have a HMIS reference table. Pink means that the table must be manually input without the use of a reference table. Whenever you see gray with red text, that means that there's missing data, and oftentimes it's referencing that there's no date of birth entered. And then yellow is simply totals. That shows you the totals for the tables. And again, any cells highlighted with orange or pink must be filled in. You have to fill in every single one of those. That is what you are submitting to DFSS. So again, the orange cells have the benefit of having a reference table, and the pink cells do not currently have data to reference in HMIS. And here's a bit of a quick example of it, just showing you how you would have to go about this. Now we're going to be seeing what this looks like live with some dummy data that we pulled. And again, I wanted to talk through the pink cells, the pink tables. Now, here is a section that not all of you will be seeing. So this is turnaways and referrals. Now, we don't collect all of this information in HMIS, so there's no way for you to be able to pull that from HMIS. So what we do in this instance is that we ask you to manually source it. Now, before you go and look for section 13, just know that it's not, this section is not required for every single agency. So depending on your agency project type, this may be entirely blacked out for you. But I just wanted to use this as an example to show you what a pink table would look like. And then we have the no DOBs. So the report is dependent on having date of birth present so that we can categorize clients either as adults or as children. So clients that don't have a date of birth are going to be listed on the DFSS quarterly report details so that we can then slot them into the appropriate categorization of whether they're an adult or a child. And I also want to mention that we have had several family projects say that the number of adults to the number of household heads of households are off. And one thing to keep in mind is that if a child, if a dependent is over 18, they will appear as an adult. So so take this image right here where there's no income. There are five households and 6 adults. Well, what could happen is that one of those children, one of those dependents, might be 18 years old, and so they're going to be counted as an adult. So if you're ever wondering what that discrepancy between the household and adults are, just know that we are counting children or dependents that are over the age of 18 as adults. Now, there's some more categorization things that have to happen with gender and family composition. So there are several sections in the report that break down by gender and family composition. Now, IDHS and HUD do not have the same data standards for these elements. And in particular, the differentiation is occurring when we talk about clients who are transgender or gender nonconforming. The major sections and questions are going to be in question that will be affected by this are sections 1B, 1C, and section 5. So I brought up this section 5 right here just to show you an example. So as you can see, what we have in this image, the orange table only lists 2 options. It's a binary option of male or female. Whereas with HUD, maybe you work with clients that are gender non-conforming or clients that are transgender. And right now, what has to be done is that you would have to slot that client who's gender non-conforming or transgender into that binary. So we are definitely going to be following up with IDHS to attempt to change these data elements so that they truly reflect the client's gender expressions. But for this quarter, if you could please just slot the client into the appropriate or the most appropriate binary there. Now I'm going to show you how to run the report, and I'm going to do it in 2 methods. I'll show you how to run the report in screen through the view report function, and then I'll show you the much more effective way of just scheduling the report to run. So I have Service Point opened up, and I'll make that a little bigger. And everyone should be able to see Connect to Art right up here. If you do not see Connect to Art, you will not be able to download this report. So you'll go ahead and click on Connect to Art. You'll navigate over to the public folder, to the Chicago COC reports, open up DFSS, and then DFSS quarterly. Now, what I'd say is, so now there are 2 different folders here. So client detail reports is what you want to use in order to troubleshoot. Client detail reports will show you the summary page, but also show you a listing of clients that are being counted in that report. So these reports are the ones you want to pull so that you can troubleshoot and make sure your data is accurate. Now, when you're ready to submit your report, you'll download these. You'll download the reports for submission. Now, these reports for submission only include the summary page, and that's all you need to send over to DFSS. So, again, if you want to troubleshoot, you'll use the client detail reports, and when you're ready to submit after doing all your troubleshooting, you'll download these reports. So I want to go ahead and run the quarterly report details. So I'll click on the magnifying glass, and I'll want to show you how to do this through View Report, and you'll notice that it's going to take a lot of time. So I'll click on View Report, and it opens up another tab, and it takes a while to process. So we'll click on OK. And you have to be a little patient with this. So what we've been encountering is that several providers try to click on View Report, and so when they come here, it takes a significant amount of time to actually process. And so I'm going to wait a little bit to see how long it might take to process, and if it does not work, then I'm going to go ahead and actually show you a much more effective way of obtaining this report. All right, so actually while that's cooking, I want to go ahead and show you how to schedule the report for yourself. So I'm going to leave this running in the background, but notice that it's going to take a pretty significant amount of time before we see a prompt. So I'm going to go back to my tab on art, and let's say I want to run the quarterly report details. So I'd click on the magnifying glass, and then I'll click on Schedule Report. So instead of View Report, I clicked on Schedule Report. And if you look at these prompts, it looks very intimidating. It looks like you have to answer every single one of these. You don't. The only thing you have to answer is this enter providers for a report. So the first one that's highlighted, that's the only prompt you have to worry about. And you are actually going to be indicating which project you're actually running this on. And so again, the only one we have to worry about, we don't have to do EDA mode, we don't have to do the start date, end date, none of that. None of that has to be touched. We only worry about the enter providers for report. So the way we do that is by clicking on select. You'll see here that we don't have any providers in this box, so we'll have to click select. And this takes a little bit to load too. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and search for all Chicago. And we have a dummy provider already set up in the system, so I will click on All Chicago Emergency Shelter. And notice that it is now under my selected values. So I'll click on Submit here. And note that my Enter Providers for Report, I now have All Chicago listed. I'll go ahead and click on Next. And this screen is really just saying, how do you want to schedule this? Do you want this coming coming to your inbox only once? Do you want it coming to your inbox on a daily basis, etc.? So you could leave the name as it is, and the report. And what I would actually recommend is maybe you want to change it to indicate the date that you pulled it. So I'll say 3/21/19. The report format can be in Excel, and you'll always want this in Excel. A lot of the data entry is going to be in Excel. So if you do it in PDF, you're not going to be able to change any data, and that's literally what we need you to do. So download everything in Excel, and the interval can be set for just once. So you might also notice that you have the options of doing it daily and weekly and monthly. It would be a good idea to run it potentially monthly, but the only thing to note is that if you do select daily, weekly, or monthly, you want to set the start date for a day in advance. So here, if I wanted to do daily, I'd say that starting tomorrow on the 22nd, I want the report to come in. Now, I have to edit the end date, but you get the gist. You have to set it a day in advance so that tomorrow the report will come to you and continuously run. Now, I don't want to do that. I just want to run it once, and I'll click on Send. So now what will happen is that the report will process in the background. So you can use Art and Service Point for whatever you want to do, and it will come to your inbox in about 15 to 20 minutes. So I have already done a couple of pre-scheduled reports. So I'll open up my inbox and notice that I have a brand new fresh report right here. Now, what I'll do is I'll download this DFSS quarterly report for review, and I'll do that by clicking this magnifying glass and click on download. And then notice down here, so this is my browser, it's a Chrome browser, and all new downloads appear at the bottom. So if you ever have, depending on your browser, it may just go to your downloads folder or your documents folder. So depending on your browser, it may come in a different way, but just know that it downloaded an actual Excel file. And at this point, I would click on it to open up, but I already have a couple preset for myself. And so let me go ahead and take a look, and you can see that it's actually still processing. So this takes quite some time to actually run. I'm glad I was able to show you how long this takes, because in the time that it takes this to even prompt me to ask me which project this should be run on, I've already scheduled it, and in a couple of minutes it will be coming through in my inbox. So this is a pretty good way of sort of setting it and forgetting it and coming back to it when it's done. So I will skip this. So I'll X out of here. Now on my dummy provider, I have a couple of reports already actually. So I want to review the quarterly report, then I'll go into the carryover report, and these two reports are very similar, and I'll explain the logic behind them. So the quarterly and the carryover report both have the same types of tabs. They're just looking at different client pools. So this quarterly report is really looking at the entry and exit. So if you look here, we have the entry exit summary tab, the EE demographics, and EE in this case means entry exit, EE special needs, EE income and benefits, services, and LOS, which is length of stay. So let's look at the report information. This basically gives you what your Chicago program type is. If this is empty, shoot us an email. So this has to be filled out. If it's not filled out, send us an email and we will ensure that something is actually there. It shows you which providers this report ran on and when the report start date end dates are. Leave this alone. We've preset it for you. You do not have to worry about that. You shouldn't have to do anything for that. The only thing that you really have to indicate for us is this All Chicago Emergent. Well, you have to indicate what the provider is, what the project is, and the project type. If this doesn't automatically fill in, you have to let us know. So on the entry exit summary, this is ultimately what the report will be. This is what the final submitted report would be pulling from. So you're going to be editing this report and filling it out. Now, this entry exit summary, this entry exit report, it's looking at the clients that have entered and exited your program. So you'll notice that right up here on question 1, we have a lot of set data. But then if we keep scrolling down, we notice that now that's like 1 or 2, it's a very low numbers. The reason it's doing that is because this report was set up to only be pulling in clients that have entered and exited your project. So this up here, question number one, it's looking at the entire project. It's looking at everyone that was served through the quarter. But then once we get below there, for the most part, it's only the folks that have entered or exited the project in that quarter, in that time frame. So it won't be pulling in uh, anyone from your previous entry from the previous quarter. This is only looking at people that have entered your project from January 1st until April 1st. Now, what you'll have to do here, you're going to be pulling each of these informations. You're going to be overlooking them, and making sure that they're okay. So, if I were to be submitting a report for the All Chicago Emergency Shelter, I'd have to look at my reference table, see if that makes sense, and then if it makes sense and it's not so erroneous, I would go ahead and copy it over. So I know this is a bit of manual work that you're going to have to do, but again, you have a reference table, and the idea is that the data gets more accurate as you go along. And so you'd have to do this for the entire report. And here you can see we get back to this issue of gender, where we have to then slot these male with child, other single males into one of these reports or one of these columns. And then same here, the entering family size, if it's a single person, we would enter it one here and then zeros for the rest. And so this is hopefully intuitive, where you're just going to sort of review these numbers, and if they make sense, you'll add them there. There are going to be certain situations where you have these responses elsewhere. You may have it in a separate database, you may have it in Excel, somewhere else, right? You just don't have it in HMIS. And so just keep that in mind. This is exactly what it says. It's a reference table. It's something for you to reference and make sure is accurate. So again, if you notice that they're more or less on point, then you'll go ahead and actually input them. But if it is wildly uh, wildly off base, then that's where you'll want to sort of look at your HMIS data, let us know what's going on, or switch over to the process of sourcing data from your other databases, from Excel, from the handsheet, however you were doing it before to submit these reports. And so notice here I have a couple of missing data entries. There's one no date of birth, but then there's one where a client does not have their ethnicity listed, and that's causing issues as to whether or not they're Hispanic or non-Hispanic. So let's take a look at the other tabs. So I'll switch over to EE demographics, entry exit demographics, and this has two different tables. It has a table for clients that are entering the project and a table for clients that are exiting the project. And you'll notice that it lists out for you which clients are missing information. So you really want to ensure that all of these little yellow cells are taken care of, that you get rid of them, and you're going to do that by going into HMIS and addressing each of these clients' entry assessments. And then we also have the clients exiting between 1 and 4/1/2019. And then if we take a look at special needs, this lists out any clients that may have disabilities, and it also lists out clients that are considered chronically homeless. So this lists out clients that sort of have some type of special needs to be listed here. And this additional field detail for entering clients, that's really saying these clients are pulled in if they indicate to us that they are a domestic violence survivor, or they are an unaccompanied youth, a pregnant parenting teen, or an ex-offender. So let's go to income and benefits. And what this is again doing, it's looking at the income, non-cash benefits, insurance, and food stamp records of clients that are entering and exiting. So in blue, we have clients that are entering, And in this sort of green black color, we have clients that are exiting and their records for income, non-cash benefits, and insurance. And then we have Services tab. So the Services tab is pulling in information from service transactions. Now, not every agency does service transactions. It really depends on your agency. So we fully understand that you may have to go to an external database to pull this information for yourselves. So if you have service transactions on here in HMIS, it'll pull through. Otherwise, you will likely have to do this manually by sourcing elsewhere. And then we have the length of stay. So this measures clients' length of stay. Uh, and again, what you'll notice is that there is a first table right up here, but then when you scroll all the way down, there's another exit table. So this is a table for all clients in the project during the period, and this is a table for clients that have exited. So this is a really good way of seeing who is being pulled into this roster, and it will also list any weird information that may be there. So this is a good way of seeing, if your numbers are off, you will want to sort of sort this and analyze it to see who needs to be exited, who was erroneously entered, etc. And it's the same for the exiters too. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the carryover report, but the carryover report is essentially the same idea. The carryover report is built in a very similar way to that quarterly report entry exit, that quarterly entry exit report. So the carryover reports are different in that it's looking at clients that came into your that were in your program, enrolled in your program the day before the quarter started. So these numbers here that you're looking at, it's all clients that were in your project on December 31st, 2018. And it's looking at them from that point all throughout the quarter. So whereas the other report is only looking at people who are coming in and leaving the project, this is looking at the folks that stayed in the project throughout. And again, you look at the demographics, the clients that are carried over in the project from 119, and that's the only table on here. Then we also have, again, carryover special needs, and that's going to be listing the disability details, any information about whether they're a domestic violence survivor, unaccompanied youth, pregnant parenting teen, or an ex-offender, or that they have a disabling condition or indeed are a veteran, and who is considered chronically homeless. And then this income is exactly the same as how it looks in the entry exit report itself. And you'll also notice that there's no length of stay here. So I'll X out of here. And then a much different report is the performance outcomes. So this performance outcomes A, you'll notice that it operates by what your Chicago program model is. So here I don't have a Chicago program model entered, and it grayed out everything for me. So the performance outcomes report is dependent on knowing what your program model type is, because they measure you dependent on what the model is. So if it doesn't know what your model is, it's just going to gray out everything and ask you to get in touch with us. Now, not every project type is going to see every single one of these. So you may see a couple when you run this report that if you're permanent housing, it'll black out a couple of these rows, sort of showing you that you do not need to respond to them. And again, it really varies depending on what type your project is. And then there are additional pieces of information you'll have to put in there. And again, this depends on your type. And because these are pink cells, that means that you're going to have to input them and source them elsewhere. take a look at details, and this details tab is really pulling in from it's pulling in any clients that are being calculated for the performance outcomes. I'll X out of that and we will go back to our presentation. So the final thing I want to touch base on before we break for today is who you're going to be submitting your report to. So each project, not agency, each project should send their report files in one email to Maria Lamoth, and each of those reports should be saved as an Excel file with your agency and project name. So something might be for myself, this All Chicago Emergency Shelter project, I would just input in this bracket for agency all Chicago underscore emergency shelter underscore performance outcomes, and etc. So when you send this out to Maria Lamoth, you're going to be sending one email for your project, and that email will have 2 to 3 reports. Because if you remember, carryover reports are only due for certain project types. Not every single agency has to submit a carryover report. And so let's look at which agencies do have to submit a carryover report. So for this quarter, if you are an interim shelter, if your project type is as an interim shelter, a permanent housing with short-term supports, youth intentional housing supports, and safe haven model, then you are required to send in a carryover report. If you are not any of these 4 program model types, then you do not need to worry about sending in a carryover report. So folks, I hope that has been helpful. If there's any other thing that I can help you with, by all means, please submit a ticket to us or shoot us an email at hmis@allchicago.org. Thanks a lot.